Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning, and welcome for our webinar in association with Egyptian Tax Authority, e-commerce tax unit. So today we will discuss a very interesting topic, which is related to digital and other remote service by non-resident. First of all, let's introduce ourselves on the webinar. My name is Hani Naggar. I'm Associate Tax Partner in WTS Dhruva. I have also with me Mr. Geet, is Associate Tax Partner in WTS Dhruva. Mr. Khalid Mandoor from Egyptian Tax Authority. Yes, Geet, please. Before we start to go in deep on our webinar today, allow me please to introduce WTS Dhruva and also as well as the e-commerce tax unit in Egyptian Tax Authority. We as WTS Dhruva, we are a leading global tax practice. We are WTS representing for over 100 countries. As WTS Dhruva, we as a tax boutique firm, we are not working or conducting any annual audits, which also to avoid us for any for any conflicts of interest, and which will maintain or remain as a long-term trusted advisor for our clients. From our client perspective, we already advising a various client number, including governmental sector, multinational companies, as well as family groups, in person also, or small enterprises as well. Our journey in UAE, we founded in 2017 in UAE. All of the team here of ex-Big Four and ex-multinational companies. We almost now 60 plus team member. As I mentioned, we already largest boutique tax firm in UAE, and we already also working for other GCC and Middle East country. Our experience in VAT, this is we can highlight the main 6 pillars that we can share with you. Audience all. We have around 40 active and very large advisory and compliance projects covering multiple jurisdictions in GCC and Middle East. We have around or more 150 monthly compliance review of the client. We have 100 plus published media articles and alerts. You can also log in on our website, and you can find all the articles and publication already there if someone interested to go and read it in details. We have, as I mentioned, more than 130 active clients in GCC. We have as well more than 200 tax health check conducted for the client, and more than 450 million dirham we managed to refund for our clients. I will pause here for a couple of minutes, and I will please ask Mr. Khalid to introduce himself and the team and the e-commerce tax unit in Egyptian Tax Authority. It's with you, Mr. Khalid.
Thank you, Mr. Hani. Good morning, everybody. I am Khalid Mandoor. I'm a member of e-commerce tax unit in Egyptian Tax Authority. I think Ms. Sarah is a member of Egyptian Tax Authority. Will talk about the milestone of the beginning and establish of Egyptian e-commerce tax unit. Ms. Sarah.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Abdel Fattah from the Egyptian Tax Authority and member of e-commerce tax unit. E-commerce tax unit, the history of e-commerce tax unit in 2020, the Egyptian Minister of Finance issued a decree number 307 to establish the e-commerce tax unit as the Egyptian Tax Authority. In 2021, the head of the Egyptian Tax Authority issued a decree number 212 to form the e-commerce tax unit at the head office of the Egyptian Tax Authority. The e-commerce tax unit is a specialized team focusing on income tax, and value-added taxes. The e-commerce tax unit's role is providing tax awareness to e-commerce taxpayers to ensure tax compliance in Egypt, and its responsibilities follow up in monitoring, registering, examining, and collecting taxes on e-commerce transactions and content creators and non-resident vendors providing remote or digital services in Egypt. The legal framework under which the unit operates, including Income Tax Law number 91 of 2005, Value-Added Tax Law number 67 of 2016, and relevant guidelines for e-commerce and content creators and VAT guidelines for non-resident vendor per to the Minister of Finance Decree number 160 of 2023. The unit's economic impact activities contribute to integrating the unofficial digital economy into the official Egyptian economy. Thank you, everyone. Mr. Khaled?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Khaled, and thank you, Mrs. Sarah. First of all, before we go for introduction to Egypt VAT, I want to thank Egyptian Tax Authority and e-commerce tax unit, especially Mr. Khaled and Mrs. Sarah, for this initiative, which sharing the information and knowledge with the taxpayer, which we believe also it's a very big add value to the tax market for any taxpayer to understand what is his liability and what is the responsibility and what he should do, which we will cover in details in this incoming slides. So coming in summary for VAT regime in Egypt. Maybe all of us or some of us already are aware or know that VAT is a tax on consumption, and it's levied on each transaction through the supply chain. So from stage to stage, there is a VAT should be charged, and VAT as input can be claimed. Business which are registered or required to register for VAT, it's defined under VAT regulation as a taxable person, shall charge VAT on supplies of goods and service to their customer. VAT, which is known as output tax, as I mentioned, it's on sales or output, it will be charged to the customer. And you as a company or a taxpayer, you're already receiving some invoices charged by VAT, which we call it as input tax, and this can be claimable from your output tax. Then you can submit or settle liability as a net of between input tax and output tax. The Egypt VAT journey started in 1991 as a general sales tax, or which we already know as a sales tax. As abbreviation, some of us use an abbreviation called GCT. And then in August 2016, the Egyptian parliament has discussed and approved the new value-added tax regulation or law. In September 2016, the VAT law number 67 became into effective. If you remember, I remember at this time it was Thursday evening or something like this. So everyone in the market was a little bit confused what will happen next day. And in March 2017, the VAT executive regulation released. In January 2022, there is a major amendment happened for VAT, which under law number 67, under law number 3 for 2022, amending some provision for law number 67 for 2016. Then in March 2023, the Minister Decree MD number 160 issued guidelines for digital service provided by non-residents, which our webinar today discuss and highlight main aspect of this one. Yes, Geet, thank you. So I will pause here and Geet will Mr. Khaled will cover the coming slide for remote service, covering the scope and place of supply and VAT rate. Yes, Mr. Khaled, this was you.
Thank you, Mr. Hani. I will take it from here. First of all, we also know there's two kinds of registrants and three kinds of services and supplies. So we can talk about services. We have two kinds of services: remote services and on-the-spot services. Both of them, the non-resident provider who rendering any kind of services for non-resident Egyptian should be obligated to register in Egyptian VAT law under simplified vendor registration system. So remote services is so simple, but it's so difficult to substance because remote services as digital content. Suppliers of game application software, it transfer from the vendor to the end user through internet. We don't have a physical substance or a physical location to rendering these services. Otherwise, the on-the-spot services is provided by a physical location, but you can booking through internet, through e-devices, like booking a hotel services, physical services, physical entry on to entertainment or sporting events, restaurant and catering booking or reservation, and both of services. Effective date of simplified registration is 22 of June 2023. So if any non-resident person or entity are rendering to Egyptian P2C any kind of these services, must register on simplified vendor registration, through simplified vendor registration. Next slide, please. So we know to no, next slide. Okay. So the place of supply may take two types, as we mentioned before: remote services, the non-resident vendor rendering the remote services to recipient in Egypt. So the obligation to first step is registered in Egyptian VAT law. Second, VAT will collect and paid in Egypt. For the sake, okay, the recipients considered to be in Egypt, we have three criteria to determine who is resident in Egypt and who is not. First one, the non-registered person having a permanent residence in Egypt. That's for entity. The registered taxpayer in Egypt, that's for entity. Governmental body, public of economic authority, other authority, or non-registered entity in Egypt. So the criteria for B2B treatment in Egypt, we can determine residency from one of these terms. Next slide, please. Now, the difficult is how to determine the permanent residence for the end user, the individual end user. We have three criteria: the residence information, which mean one of two, the building address of the recipients, home address of the recipients. Second criteria, access information, mobile country code, IP address, fixed landline location. Third criteria, payment information, such as credit card information, bank identification number, bank account detail. If one of these is located in Egypt, we can determine the permanent residence in Egypt, and the VAT tax will apply in the invoice. If we found two of the above information is accurate, so the VAT is implementing on the invoice. we can talk about it in 3 points. Number 1, where above mentioned information in conundrum, non-resident vendor should obtain at least 2 pieces of non-conflictual information: physical location of the customer or consumer at the time of order will not be considered for determining the VAT treatment. Consumer having multiple locations and services are used by permanent establish of the recipients in another country have well not considered our recipient in Egypt. This is a difficult point, but it's between a parent and its subsidiaries. So we will move to next slide, please. The VAT rate in Egypt, especially for non-resident registrants, should clear and pay a tax without 3% of tax price or tax rates. First one, the 14% is the general price for any kind of services except the other rate. The other rate is 10% for only the professional and the consultancy services, like a legal consultancy, accountant bookkeeping, marketing consultancy, the exempted services like educational and training, and also a medical consultancy, subscription of ebook or magazine and e-news, advertising. There is some kind of advertisements are exempted by law number 3 for 2022, like a personal advertising for seeking job, missing objects, election, and governmental announcements. So we talk now about the services and who should pay and the tax rate. Now, taxability for who will receive the services. Is it B2B treatment or B2C treatment? Some people ask it about how we deal between the both, because B2C treatment is what we are talking about today, the simplified vendor registration. The non-resident vendor who is rendering or providing his services to B2C in Egypt should register under the simplified vendor registration scheme, and he should collect the VAT under any rate and submitted his monthly VAT return and remit the value of the tax. But the B2B treatment is worldwide have another scheme. It's commonly named reverse charge scheme. So if a non-resident vendor provides any kind of services, remotely services, through its own website or through its EBD electronic distribution board to registered or business customer in Egypt. So B2B, the recipient of the services, we call it customer. B2C, which receives the services, we call it consumer, the end user. So if we assume the non-resident vendor provide its service to the registered business in Egypt, customer in Egypt, so the obligation to account and pay the VAT tax, the registered in Egypt, the recipients of the services, if it B2B treatment. So we can talk about B, to self-account under RCS as a reverse charge scheme, and pay the ETA within 30 days from the date of supply of services consumed. P should provide its TRN to A. Okay. When the non-registered vendor registered in Egypt, he should ask it the B2B treatment through the B2B treatment, the registered or business customer in Egypt to provide its tax registration number, and also the on the normal course of business, the normal data collection. My name, my location, my bank number. That's to provide and confirming the tax registration number is privately to the recipients of the service as registered in Egypt. A is required to ensure the validity of tax registration numbers through APT. Registered business customer in Egypt must apply RCS irrespective in further providing taxable services or non-taxable suppliers. So if anyone registered in Egypt and if he is dealt with taxable supplies or non-taxable supplies, should register under reverse charge scheme in Egypt, and he's obligatory to collect and pay the VAT on the Egyptian registers, not the non-registered vendor registered, which have one obligatory to collecting the tax return, the tax registration number of the Egyptian customer, and provide it to ETA when ETA is asked for it. Now, next slide, please. The consumer, P2C treatment. We can talk about the service provider, the non-resident service provider, which provides its services to unregistered person in Egypt. We can call it an end user or consumer. In this case, the vendor can provide its services through one of two ways. First one, through its website, through its application, his application, directly to the unregistered customer in Egypt. In this case, the provider must be registered through Simplified Vendor Registration and collecting the VAT tax and submit it in his VAT monthly return. In the other case, if the non-resident vendor provides his remote services through EBD, electronic distribution port, so we have two ways here. In a common case, the electronic distribution port should be registered under Simplified Vendor Registration, but we have some exceptions. We will talk about it in next slide. Next slide, please. So now, if the EBD is the vendor registration in Egypt, so EBD has a right and has obligation. The right, if the EBD for access the VAT, which is not declared by the vendor provided, the EBD is not responsible for the wrong information in three cases. First one, if the EBD dependent on the information provided by the vendor or third party to correctly declare and pay VAT in the normal course of business. If the first one is not provided to the EBD or the information provided to EBD is erroneous. Number three, the EBD couldn't responsibly know that information provided was incorrect from the his vendor who is paying or rendering his service through the EBD. So that's to protect the EBD from the violence of information from the private vendor. Next slide, please. Here is the exception where the EBD is not considered a supplier. We have two criteria. First one, it's between the EBD and the vendor, the seller on the EBD. If there is a contract between the EBD and the vendor, ensure the vendor who is the sale through the EBD to a consumer or customer in Egypt and the vendor will be obligated to register in Egypt and collecting the VAT and pay it in Egypt. So the APD is not considered as a supply. But we have something like a documentation issued by the consumer identifies the vendor as a person that renders the service and the service rendered. In this case, the vendor, the dealer on the APD, or we can call it as a seller on the APD, who should issue the invoice to the Egyptian consumer or customer, which includes the normal data of the invoice, like the name, its name and its registration number, tax registration number in Egypt, and the nature of the service, the amount of the service, the VAT amount, VAT percentage. That's number one criteria between the vendor and the APD. Number two, if the APD has one of the three next criteria, APD doesn't authorize delivery to the service. Number two, APD not authorized to charge the recipient of the sale. Number three, APD doesn't directly or indirectly set any tax and condition under which sale is made. In these cases, we can consider the APD is an advertisement cost. The main revenue is a commission from the vendor. He is which advertise his or promoting his services through the APD, and the APD is not responsible to determine the price, determine the delivery terms, cannot charge the recipient of the sale, and don't have any directly authority to determine the terms and conditions for the sales. So we can talk. It's if the vendor is taking the responsibility for registering in Egypt, we have to ensure to be have a written agreement between the seller and the APD. The seller will be responsible to collect and remit the VAT to ETA Egyptian tax authority. Next slide, please. Okay, that's a summary for VAT applicability. If the services rendered from Egypt to Egypt, that's a traditional registration. The supplier will obligate to collect and pay the VAT. Number two, if the services rendered from outside Egypt to Egyptian customer, in this case, it's customer registered in Egypt, it's a P2P treatment. In this case, the recipient, the Egyptian registered, is liable to account and remit the VAT to Egyptian tax authority under the RCS system. It's a reverse charge scheme. If the services rendered from outside Egypt to final user or consumer or unregistered person, in this case, the supplier, the outside Egypt, the non-resident vendor, will obligate to register, collecting, and paying the VAT to Egyptian tax authority under the Simplified Vendor Registration Regime. The other case, the last case, if the rendered from outside Egypt to outside Egypt, there is no action and no VAT, and it's out of our coverage area in Egypt. So I think next slide.
So thank you, Mr. Khalid. I think that was a good overview of how VAT applies to non-residents on remote services. I think from a UAE point of view, what I see is that most of the provisions in Egypt on remote services are similar to how we have VAT on e-commerce services here in the UAE VAT. I think
yes,
only
right.
Yeah,
Yes.
only two, three things are different. One is in UAE, we have a standard rate of 5%, whereas in Egypt, we have 10%, 14%, and an exempt category.
Yes,
And
yes.
secondly, on the marketplace, the electronic distribution platform that you referred to, where in some cases, the marketplace could be subject to VAT on behalf of non-resident suppliers if some of those conditions are met. Otherwise, in most cases, the non-resident suppliers are required to register and pay VAT in Egypt. So
Yes.
that was a good overview, Mr. Khalid. Thank you very much. So from here, I'll just move on the compliances, which is a very important part, which is the first part is the registration process. Starting with the threshold, I think, so for remote and on-spot services, the threshold for VAT registration is 500,000 Egyptian pound. And for professional and consulting services, there is no threshold provided. Companies who are providing these services in Egypt has to register from day one. Similarly, for deregistration, if a company cease to provide any business activity in Egypt, then they are required to deregister themselves and make an application to ETA. And the date of submission of the application to the ETA will be considered as the deemed date of deregistration. So this is the broad overview on what is the registration threshold for non-residents in Egypt. In terms of the process, I think it's, as the name suggests, it's a simplified vendor registration scheme where companies are required to provide their basic information in terms of the residence of the country, the address, business address of the company, and the contact person whom ETA should be getting in touch with for any tax compliances. So that is a basic application that needs to be submitted on the online portal. And once it is submitted, the ETA will review the application. And if any information or data required, they would send an email, but they would give you a provisional tax registration. And once all the data is available, they will give you a final tax registration number and the registration certificate for you to start complying with the Egypt VAT provisions. And if a company fails to register, then from the date of sales made by that particular company will be the date from which companies are required to register and pay taxes. So this is the basic overview on the registration for the procedure. And there could be many companies who might have been registered in Egypt through a representative. Now with this, under these guidelines, companies will be required to deregister themselves under the standard registration and have to apply for a simplified vendor registration and do the VAT compliances. So the requirement to have a local rep is no more required for non-resident companies, and they can directly register themselves without having any representative and follow the VAT compliances. So as I said, companies who are willing to register for this under this scheme are required to log into eta.gov.eg and complete the registration form. As I mentioned earlier, basic information is generally sought in terms of the nationality, the tax residency country, registered address of the business, and the contact person details in terms of the mobile and email ID. With this, once this application is made, that will be for review for the ETA, and then they will grant a registration number. And moving on to the tax compliances, there are two things. One is a requirement to issue invoices. The companies who are providing services to customers in Egypt will be required to raise invoice which should have basic information in terms of the business entity details, entity name and the TRN and the invoice number and date, and the details about the supply in terms of the description, the VAT amount, and then the bill value. So all the invoices which are raised to the customers, this is the information that needs to be kept and retained by the company for 5 years. So the retention period in Egypt is 5 years. So typical information that you would generally have in your system in terms of the type of supply, the date of supply, the revenue earned from Egypt customers, and the VAT payable has to be stored with the company. And these information can be kept at the resident country and has to be provided to the ETA as and when the company is under audit. Now, in terms of the filing of VAT return, the companies are required to file their returns on a monthly basis, and the due date for filing the VAT return is the last date of the subsequent month. by which companies are required to pay the taxes as well as file the VAT returns. In terms of the return filing and the format, it's quite simple. As the name suggests, it's very simplified, where companies are required to provide their entity details and the value of the supplies made to the Egypt customers. And if there are any corrections, if any, but otherwise, this is the only information which is required to be submitted on a monthly basis to the ETA. Now, in terms of payment process, again, this is very important. Recently, on 1st of December 2023, ETA has introduced bank account details for making the payment in USD or in other currencies. So earlier it was a mandate to make the payment of taxes in Egyptian pound, but now companies can pay their taxes on a monthly basis through using a USD or a Euro currency bank account, which have been provided by ETA. And one most important thing here is that the companies will be required to pay the taxes first, and the details of the SWIFT details of the payment has to be mentioned in the tax return. So that is very important. I think companies first have to calculate their taxes and compute and then pay the tax amount before end of the month, and then those information of the payment details have to be mentioned in the VAT return. Second most information important here is that input tax will not be available to the companies. They will have to seek a refund, and there is a refund process which we'll discuss in subsequent slides. But companies will not be entitled to make an input tax adjustment in the VAT return. It has to be through a tax refund process. Now, moving on to the tax refund process. Again, as I said, companies will have to claim a tax refund if they have incurred any input tax in Egypt, which has been used for making a taxable supply. So companies will be required to make a simple application on the portal, and with all the supporting documents such as supplier invoice, and then that will be under review by the ETA, and then it will be refunded to the company. Now I'll request Mr. Khalid to speak about the penalties and how are those applied on non-resident companies.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Now we are talking about the penalties in Egypt. The penalties in Egypt, whether simplified vendor registration or not, we have 5 points of the 6 is related to any registrant in Egypt. First one, the late VAT payment. ETA will charge 1.5% additional tax on the taxpayer per month or part of month. Number 2, late filing or non-filing of the VAT return declaring inaccurate information. ETA entitled to impose a penalties between 3,000 pounds Egyptian pound and 50,000 pounds. VAT return is not submitted within 60 days of the due date. A penalty between 50k Egyptian pounds and up to 2 million Egyptian pounds will be imposed. Tax evasion. Tax evasion is a penalty of 5k Egyptian pound up to 15k Egyptian pounds, or imprisonment between imprisonment between 3 and 5 years in the jail. Duplicate the action if they committed within 3 years. Number 4, not reporting invoice in the time. Penalties between 20k Egyptian pounds up to 100k Egyptian pounds. For the simplified vendor registration, the non-resident registrants, ETA may ban access to Egyptian markets until the registration is obtained. If the application on the non-resident vendor is to register in Egypt, under Egyptian law. Also, when Egyptian tax laws are not complied, ETA will contact the responsible person data in the registration form, and if they don't respond, ETA may commence a risk review. A risk review may result in 2 points. Registering the person for Egypt VAT and sending an assessment of liability based on ETA's calculation with additional penalties. Number 2, and the last, registering the debt in the court in the responsible person's country. The penalties is too hard in Egyptian law, and I invite any company, any simplified vendor registration person or entity to comply with the Egyptian law. We are also cooperate with OECD to prepare a blacklist which multinational companies doesn't comply with VAT Egyptian law. Thank you, and Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Khalid. I think what is important is that if the companies fail to register, then there could be likely a ban on accessing the Egyptian market, which is very important. And that could be more than a tax implication. I think it will be a loss of business for these non-resident companies. So it is very important that companies register voluntarily and pay the taxes which are due to Egypt Tax Authority. So thank you for that overview. I think the key takeaways that what I could see for companies which are not residing in Egypt is that, first of all, they need to determine the applicability of the services that they provide. Are those services subject to tax? If they are subject to tax, then is it subject to 10%, 14%, or is it exempt? I think the second level of review is on the type of recipient. Are they providing services to B2B? And if they are providing services to B2B, are those businesses registered in Egypt? And if they are providing to B2C, then they should come forward and register for Egypt VAT. Second, I think important part is to look at the marketplace. There are so many companies which provide their services through a marketplace or an electronic distribution platform. So they need to understand what are the terms and conditions that they have agreed with the marketplace to determine whether the non-resident company is required to pay and charge VAT on their services, or if the marketplace is required to pay and charge VAT to the customer. The third most important part is completeness in terms of having documents for submitting the VAT return and to avoid penalties. Companies should come forward and register themselves on time and start paying the taxes on the services that they are providing to Egyptian end consumers. With this, I think we'll move on to the Q&A. Mr. Khalid, it would be glad if you could answer some of the questions which we have received on Q&A, and then we can conclude the session. So first of one of the questions that we have received, Mr. Khalid, is on the companies which have not registered till now. So what I understand is that the guidelines have been introduced from March of 2023, and we are today in March 2024. And companies which have not registered currently and now they're taking a step forward in terms of registering for Egypt VAT. What will be the VAT? Will they be subject to penalties for the past 1 year of non-compliance, and how will that work? Are there any penalty waiver schemes available under Egypt VAT where companies can voluntarily come forward and pay the taxes for the past 1 year?
Yes, first, the company may have a risk of ban from Egyptian market access. Second, the company can register now and calculate all the VAT on its services from 22 June 2023, the effective date of VAT tax on the simplified vendor registration, and they can contact us. We can help him to make him sure to remit all the liable VAT on him, and we can help him to pass this situation. Our mail also in the last of this the last slide of this webinar, I think we refer to it, but as I mentioned before, VAT burden always on the final consumer. You don't have to aviate, to register in VAT in any country, not just in Egypt.
Okay. So, Mr. Khalid, another question that has been asked on the Q&A chat box is on if a company which is registered in Egypt and is a resident of Egypt, and they have received some services from a non-resident vendor, and this recipient company which is registered has accounted for VAT under reverse charge mechanism, then will they be entitled to input tax credit in their VAT returns, or will they be required to claim a refund?
In this case, the Egyptian registered under the reverse charge scheme, if he is a VAT registered, in this case, if the tax amount is taxable, is a VAT taxable, he can put it in the sale and the purchase in the same time, and he will deduct in the same month return, and the final result is zero VAT payment. If the registered in income tax but not registered in VAT tax, in this case, he will pay only pay the amount of VAT instead of the simplified vendor registration, the non-resident vendor, during the 30 days of consuming the services.
Okay.
There is another question also came, Mr. Khalid. Someone or a taxpayer, he already settled or paid the VAT liability in EGB, but it got declined. So he's asking now, is it a must to settle or process the payment in foreign currency, or he can do it in EGB? I believe we already highlighted on our slide, but just for your confirmation, Mr. Khalid.
Okay, in last few months, the ministerial decree number 258, which considered the revenue currency is VAT or ordinary all kind of tax payment. So if my revenue in US dollar, so I have to pay in US dollar. If my currency of my revenue is euro or GB sterling, so I have to pay the VAT with the same currency. If I have multiple currency, in this case, I will base on the financial reporting currency.
Okay, very clear, very clear. Thank you, Mr. Khalid. Another question also, someone is asking, he's doing now a remote accounting service from another country. He's mentioned Bangladesh. So he need now to register as an e-commerce or no?
In Egypt?
Yes. He's giving this remote service to Egypt, but from other country.
Okay, he will register under simplified vendor registration. That's our object today.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah, it's already we already covered, but he's asking specifically for this country. So I believe, irrespective of which country are rendering this service to Egypt, you need to register under simplified registration scheme.
Yes, that's right.
Geet, I believe you also have some questions.
Yes. So another question that Mr. Khalid has been posted is on the education services. So what he understands is that education services provided digitally is exempt under Egypt VAT. So does he need to still register for VAT in Egypt, considering that it's an exempt service?
Yes, educational services in Egypt and medical services in Egypt is exempted for VAT.
So does he need to register for Egypt VAT, or since it's exempt, they need not register for Egypt VAT?
If he has another kind of services plus educational service, in this case, he must to register in Egypt. Once his total revenue from Egypt access 500 Egyptian pounds from any kind of services, exempted services or taxable services. But if he's just provide an educational or training service or medical advice, in this case, he is not obligated to register in Egypt.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Khalid. So another question, I think someone has posted on the treatment for B2B services. If the business customer that the non-resident supplier is providing services is not registered in Egypt, then will the non-resident supplier required to register for Egypt VAT and charge VAT, or will the non-registered business customer in Egypt required to register and account for reverse charge scheme? If you could highlight, Mr. Khalid, how will this work if the business customer in Egypt is not registered?
Okay, in this case, you should register in Egypt under Simplified Vendor Registration, and you will issue your invoice to the end user or the consumer in Egypt. Your service amount plus VAT tax. If it's 14%, it's a 14%, and if it's consultant fee, it's 10%. And in this case, you have to charge the end user in Egypt and collect VAT and pay it and with submit monthly tax return.
Okay. There is another question, Mr. Khalid. Maybe it will be, yeah, we are receiving many questions. So for the questions that we didn't answer now on the webinar, we will send answer separately for the people who already posted. However, we have two questions we can take before ending our session. The first one is asking on the case of a registered customer in Egypt, of course, and he calculated the reverse charge, RCM, and considered already the output in his return. He can claim input tax as a credit, or he can also file a refund claim.
No. If the service kind is related to his activities in the normal course of business, it's not used by himself. It's not used for a specific other reason. It's directly the service directly part of his normal course of business. In this case, he will remit it in the same month. So the result is zero. He will pay it as a VAT in the sales section, and he will deduct it in the purchase section in the same return, and the total result is zero. There is no refund. There is no any further action. He will not paying anything.
Okay, very clear. Thank you, Mr. Khalid. Git, I believe there is also maybe one question we can take it if you want.
Sure. So, Mr. Khalid, one of the questions which have been posted on the Q&A is on the payments to be made on a monthly basis. So, if a payment is made by a non-resident supplier, he's saying that the ETA representatives have asked for payment confirmation via email. So, is that a mandatory requirement to send the details about the payment on an email, or are there any improvements expected in VAT return filing form?
Okay. What I understand is should the registered respond to ETA email to ask him for provided the payment document? Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In this case, if we ask it for any document related to the VAT tax or related to its activities in Egypt, it's a taxable document. It's a taxation document. In this case,
okay.
we will ask it for any document for helping the non-resident registered. If he pay his VAT payment and a bug happened in the system, in this case, we are asked the SWIFT report to ensure he paid its VAT amount in the current period, and in this case, we will fixing the system, and he will not charge anything. Even the system is told him he's 100K fin or 100K additional tax. Once he sends us his SWIFT report, we will fix it, and he will not charge with any additional money. And it's happening when mostly when the e-finance, our developer company, it's a governmental company, by the way, updating some modules in our system in Egypt. Our SAP system is related to many departments, many tax departments. So if they by mistake made upgrade to any other department, may affect the simplified vendor system. So in this case, we are asking any document to fix its problem. Is that clear?
I think yes, Mr. Khalid, I think that's very much clear. I think we almost run out of time. Thank you, Mr. Khalid, for your valuable time and hosting this webinar with us, which is very useful to all the companies and the participants who have attended this. Hani? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hani. It's my great.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all. And again, special thanks to Egyptian Tax Authority and E-Commerce Tax Unit. Special thanks to you, Mr. Khalid and Sarah, for this initiative and arranging for organizing this webinar. And for the participants, and please accept our apologies because we received many questions. But as promised, we will try to answer them by separate emails to you or separate message to you on mailbox. And again, if you have any other queries, any questions, you already have all of our emails and tax unit emails as well. And from our experience with the team there, they are very supportive. They are very responsive. So don't be shy and ask whatever you have. Don't worry. And thank you again all, and wishing you a lovely coming day and weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.